So the community that I belong to, where my status comes from, my Indian status, is called Chiging First Nation. It begins with the letter M, but in Ojibwe, it is pronounced, but in English we can't hear it. So I just say Chiging. But and it's a recent name. We've gone back to the old name. Before that, it was called West Bay Reserve. So when she said that, it reminded my sister, who said, "Oh, look, they changed the name to M Ching Ching." So she said this to the chief, because the chief in our community looked at her and said, "It's called Chiging." Oh, it's talking. Anyways, I'm here because Rosella Kenosha, one of the great elders of our time right now, Indigenous elders from Manitoulin Island with Quimkong First Nation, she was supposed to speak today, right now. She was supposed to be here. But she has cancer and it's returned. So she's returned to taking chemotherapy, and she's not allowed to travel for 6 to 8 months. So I'm second choice. Anyways, let's continue to pray for Rosella. She has done so much for the church and for Indigenous peoples with her wisdom and knowledge. Secondly, I'm here, my aunt's daughter, my cousin Ann Seymour, married a Mohawk. She's Ojibwe, my cousin's Ojibwe, just like me, but she married a Mohawk from Akwesasne First Nation. His name is Travis Seymour. His mother's here. His mother's here, Bernice. So she's like my aunt-in-law. And then it turns out she's related to Mike Seymour, who works here at the St. Jerome's University. There he is. Stand up, Mike. So I'm related to him too. So what Native people do is they try to find out what are the connections. Who am I related to? Because as we were reminded, Laudato Si says we're all connected. And somehow we're all connected. And it's not just among people, but spiritually. So that's why the Lakota, when they end their prayers, they say, all my relations. It just doesn't mean humans. It means all of this, trees and animals and rivers and mountains, all my relations. We're all in this world together. Okay, so now I wanted to mention I have Facebook. And for my parish. It's not really for me, but I post things for my parish. And what I find is that, there's an algorithm. There's algorithms. Do you know what that means? So they find the ads that are appropriate for you. So all of my ads say, maybe you have ADHD. That's what they say. Adult style. Maybe you have the adult form of ADHD. Maybe I do. Maybe because I've so hard to listen to long conversations. My mind begins to drift, and I was listening to Father Greg on Sunday night, and I was like, focus, but my ADHD was kicking in, and so, but the next morning, I was able to listen to, after a nice sleep, I just was so moved, and I've heard so many moving things here in these days that we should be encouraged by our sharing together. Anyway, I want to see if you know where this quote comes from. I think it's one of the most beautiful quotations in the modern history of the modern church. See if you know where it comes from. The council, now beginning, rises in the church like daybreak, a forerunner of the most splendid light. It is now only dawn. Do you know where that comes from? I know she does, Catherine. You know where it comes from? It's Pope John the 23rd at the beginning of the Second Vatican Council. He says, the beginning of this council, today, October the 11th, 1962, is a new dawn for the history of our church. It's the council now beginning rises in the church like daybreak, a forerunner of the most splendid light. It is now only dawn. So I think it's still dawn. Well, maybe it's about 8 o'clock. But I've entitled my little reflections here, the dawn that we all share. The dawn that we share. Synodality and the embracing of hope. So I'll begin a little bit of an introduction because it explains part of my perspective. I was born in Chicago a long time ago. My mother was from Manitoulin Island, but in those days there was no employment opportunities. There was no jobs, no economic development, nothing like that. So people lived by farming, growing their gardens, by barbering. They had pigs, they had, things like that. My grandfather had a team of horses, so in the spring he would plow everybody's gardens. And they all bartered. There was no money. I'm talking the 30s and 40s, 50s. So there was no jobs. And my uncles wanted to buy a house. They wanted to live a good life, so where did they go? Like our ancestors did for millennia. They were all around the Great Lakes. They went to Chicago. And there, it was the end of the Second World War. The boom. There was a big economic boom in Chicago. My uncles went there. They got jobs working, lots of money. And they said to my mother, who was struggling because her dad wouldn't let her date. And they said, come to Chicago. You can get a job tomorrow. So she did, and that's where she went to Chicago, looking for work. And within some time, she met my dad, and then I was born in Chicago. And then my parents didn't want to raise us in Chicago. Even in the early 60s, it was considered dangerous, violence. So we moved to his home, which was in southern Illinois. Completely different culture, rural culture. My first language is twang, hillbilly twang. Yeah. Even my mother, when she spoke Ojibwe on the phone to her family, she spoke with a twang. They said, "What are you talking? How come you're talking like that?" This twangy Ojibwe stuff. Anyway, then when I was a little boy, I belonged to Cub Scouts. Cub Scouts, and we get badges. You learn how to build a fire without matches, you get a badge. Or if you learn how to make an Indian drum from a coffee can, you get a badge. And I got all these badges. But we would have a badge night, an awards night. And I said, "Mom, I'm getting some badges tonight. Can you please come? Can you please come?" She goes, "Oh, Daryold, I don't want to go." I said, "Please come." She said, "They'll all be staring at me." She was the only colored person of color in a sea of white. So she said, "I don't want to go. They're all going to stare at me." And I said, "Oh, Mom, please, please, please." She said, "Oh, all right, I'll go." And when she came, she said in the very back, way in the back in the dark. And I said, already I began to learn as a child, she feels shame. She feels shame. She's ashamed of what she looks like and who she is. So I already got that as a child. I sensed it. She's ashamed of who she is. Then my parents separated and we moved to Sault Ste. Marie. And when I moved to the Sioux, I knew racism. Believe me, racism is where I grew up in Illinois, it was brutally racist against black people. Not Indigenous. They didn't know Indigenous. There were no Indigenous people. But black people, Mexican people, extreme racism. Violence sometimes. So we moved to the Sioux. I'm not used to racism. But I feel it. I can sense it. In Sault Ste. Marie, the people were racist against the Indigenous, the Ojibwe people there. I picked it up right away. So you know what? I don't look Indigenous. I look like my dad. I didn't inherit these Indigenous genetics. So I passed as white, and I didn't want anyone to know I was Indigenous. So sometimes I would be embarrassed to have to go to my mother, because she'd say, "Daryold, come with me to the bank. I don't understand what they're saying. Trent, you need to tell me what they're saying." Or if we went to an office of some sort, she'd say, "I don't know what they're saying. You have to come with me." I didn't want to. I didn't want them to think that I was Native. No, that's when I was teenage. This is in the 70s. And then I had shame. I didn't want people to know that. Can you imagine in the 70s, people felt that way? It's not in say, immigrants who come here and they don't identify with their parents because of the language difference, or things like that. Immigrant children have the same experience of being embarrassed of their parents. Anyway, that's the way it was for me. Today, it's the opposite. I'm so proud of my Indigenous ancestry. Anyway, what changed? Well, we had a lot of change. You know, what happened was this Oka crisis back in 1990. And the crisis is so critical, and there had been several bonfires in southern Ontario where Native people were rising up in protest and anger, and it was violence. And Brian Mulrooney said, hey, we've got to fix this situation. What is going on with our Indigenous peoples? That there is this kind of volatility. So they started this, you know what they did? He initiated the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Let's get to the root of it. What is disturbing so many of these Indigenous peoples? And when they did this was a nationwide study, right? The books are full of information. They did a study back in the 80s, or 90s, early 90s, the Royal Commission, RCAP, they call it. And out of that study, they kept hearing something over and over again. Do you know what it was? Residential schools, residential school, residential school. We're traumatized. We're vulnerable because of this system. These systems of assimilation have not worked for us, and we're damaged as a result. So as a result of the RCAP, then Phil Fontaine did his best to start the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And then all of that. So all of these things were sources of healing for Native people. To be able to say, this is, you know, I don't have to be ashamed, because what we learned too is that it was a process of colonizing us. That's what Sister was just talking about here. Colonization. And colonization in a nutshell is this. My culture is superior to your culture. Isn't it right, to the Native people here? Did you ever feel that? That some people would say to us, my culture is superior to yours. My spirituality, my religion is superior to yours. My way of life, my way of thinking is superior to yours. And you tell the people like that long enough, they begin to believe it. They begin, yeah, they're superior. That's why my mother believed. She believed she was inferior. She did. That's colonization. So a lot of the works that we've experienced were decolonized. Anyway, I'm getting too long here. What I want to say is, what's this got to do with synodality? A lot of the things that I think of, we've already spoke about. But I want to put an Indigenous twist on it. So for instance, how many of us have been listening to the idea that we need community? Community, synodality works in community. I don't sit in a corner by myself. I have to do this with others. And for Native people, community is one of the key hallmark points of our identity. We're not alone. Bill Burke talks it, I am because we are. That is Ubuntu. That's African, but it's Indigenous all around the world. I am because we are. I am because we. The community is where we get our existence. So for Native people, we call that Bimazuen, life. Bimazuen. A minnow Bimazuen. That's what we seek as a good life here. We're not here for a long time. We're here for a short time. Let's try to make the best of it. Let's enjoy our family. Let's enjoy our children, our grandchildren. Let's have feasts. You know, let's have coffee and maybe even some smoking, pipe smoking. That's what our ancestors used to say. This is what life is. It's great. We'll do some drumming. We'll do some dancing. Let's have a good life. You know, Bimazuen. Our communities help us to enjoy this beautiful creation. Okay, so that's the first point. And the Pope calls this, maybe we could say something similar to, akin to encuentro. That's what he says, encounter. When we encounter, we experience another person in the depth of who they are, when it's authentic. When I really listen to you with the hopes of learning what you have to say, even your enemies. Let me tell you, I've got people in my parish that drive me crazy. Ask them. Anybody who's a pastor here knows that. So, but what I have not been doing is listening to them from the depth. You know, this is what Greg said. Remember when he was having that challenge with that guy who wanted to deny climate change, and he already became defensive? And, that's me too sometimes. But it doesn't get us anywhere. It makes us walk backwards, not forwards. So encuentro, the culture of encounter, that we can get along, we need it if we want to see our church reform. Otherwise, it's just polarizing. It's just, I'm right, you're wrong, no advancement. But synodos means walking together, forward, not backwards. So, Bimarsman, community. So, and we have, among the Ojibwe, we have 7 teachings, grandfather teachings. I'm not going to go through them, but they're to help us to live community. So the 7 precepts, or 7 laws, or 7 whatever you want, principles, are wisdom. We can only be wise together. We grow in wisdom together. Love. We've heard this already. You can only love with other people. You can't sit there and love yourself. Well, you could, I suppose. But Trinitarian, this time Trinitarian, love exists because there's a community. Respect. To be respectful to each other. Sometimes I'm not respectful. I have knee-jerk reactions. I'm not respectful. To be brave and courageous. That's, the Pope called that parisia. To be brave. Brave, he said it's like when you say that when the early Christians prayed the Lord's Prayer. They did it with parisia. They did it with boldness. Or when they went out and preached the message of the good news to other communities, they did it with parisia. They were bold, and they weren't shy about it. Okay. Honesty, we need to be honest. Humility, we need to be humble. Truthful, we can only be truth in community if we want to discover the truth. Okay, that's the first one. Number 2, spirituality. I learned how to preside at the Eucharist by being participant in native ceremonies. That's where I learned sacredness. When I was in native ceremonies, I felt sacredness. We would be in a lodge, in a pipe ceremony, and everything is slow and sacred, and there's a protocol, and you observe all of the teachings, and you're doing something that's very sacred. And I learned from there what sacred means when you preside at a liturgy. I learned that from my Indigenous connections. There is a community someone talked about, was it Greg? He said there is a religious community of monks who believe that their prayer is keeping the world together. Did he remember? Was that Greg who said that? Okay. Yes. There is a Hopi community in Arizona, and they pray every day. They said, if we don't pray, this world is going to spin right out of the galaxy, out of control. We have to pray. We're saving the planet, the world, by prayer. So when Sister says, prayer, number 1, so deep that it keeps us from spinning out of the galaxy. Spirituality. And our spirituality, and I think a lot of people here too understand spirituality to be connected to all of this. All of this. Our spirituality has to involve the creation, the earth, the land. We're connected to it. Without it, we don't exist. We need creation. Okay. And we have teachings called medicine wheel teachings. And they come from the plains, and we see different versions of medicine wheel teachings. It's about how we are connected, about the components. If something is missing from the medicine wheel, then it's not a circle anymore. It's a lopsided, lopsided tire going on. Have you ever tried to drive with a lopsided tire on your car? I hope not. You won't go too far. So we need to keep our medicine wheel as round as we can. It's impossible to be perfectly round. But that's part of the spirituality of interconnectedness. Healing. Number 3, healing. So, it's no secret to anyone here that Native peoples, even Murray Sinclair said, in Canada, the Indigenous people are the most fragile peoples in the country because of so many generations of forced assimilation, which never worked. Never. All the money the government's poured into assimilation, residential schools, and all of the other stuff, it never worked. It just left us wounded, fragile, traumatized, really, really unable to cope with modern circumstances. So, and it's intergenerational. Like my mother went to school, but I didn't, but I still have the scars. I know a lot of Native people here. They did not go to residential school, but we inherited the trauma that comes from degradation and fear My aunt, when she was in the girls' residential school, she said, I lived in fear. Can you imagine for several years just being scared in school? You're going to get smacked. Something like that. My uncle was beat so much that his hands, they would be so swollen he couldn't fold his hands. You know, and I never heard those stories. They never said around, oh, let's talk about our traumas in the residential school. I never heard those stories. It's not until for my uncle, he needed to write a narrative in order to get compensation. So he had to say, so the question is, what happened to you in the residential school? I never heard. And so, but he said, this is what happened to me. I wrote this down, I couldn't believe it. I was completely shocked. I just was so sad. So there's lots of healing to overcome the trauma we experience because of human sinfulness and brokenness that we all share. So synodality is about also overcoming all of that, right? To become synod means we listen to each other. And it's not just Indigenous people who have trauma. Think of those who have gone through abuse. You know, at least the Pope came to apologize to the Indigenous people. Nobody's made any apologies to those clerical sexual abuse victims. There's nothing going on with them, you know. Secondly, divorced and lay people, the traumas they've experienced trying to belong to a community that rejects them. You know, or LGBT members of how the pain that is felt. So we have lots to overcome, lots of healing to go. Synodality can help us. Finally, I want to call it decolonization. We all have to become decolonized. We all have to realize there is no culture that's superior to another. That's baloney. Every culture is a gift from God. Every culture is given to the people to help them survive and to live a good life. Ben Pumatsuan, we all have that, no matter where we're from. Our cultures have meant to allow us to survive and to experience happiness and joy. That's what this world is about. That's what we're supposed to be here, enjoying this beautiful day and coming together and being in community together. So this is, and the challenge is for us to change the way of thinking. And the Pope has said, Pope Francis said, beware. There are new forms of colonization taking place. There may not be residential schools anymore, but beware. There are new forms of colonization that are happening and taking place. Beware of them. Today it's economic, it's technological, it's internet, it's all kinds of ways that we're being colonized today. So the Pope said, be aware of them. Read the signs of the times. Be aware of what's going on in the world. So that's what we do. So the dawn that we share is about hopefulness, that whatever we experienced in the past, you know, when we do the prayer to the four, I'm going to end with this. When we do the prayer in the four directions, the first direction we face is the east, because that's where the dawn comes every morning. Every morning the dawn comes and gives us hope for the rest of the day. So we face the east and we say, oh my God, thank you, Creator, for this beautiful day. Bless me, bless my family, bless my community, bless my friends, for all the beautiful things that can take place this day if I have an open mind. And if I have an open will, I can be blessed this day. That's the dawn that we all share for a blessed future. And synodality is one tool, I think, a major important tool to help us to experience this new dawn. Thank you.